Hello, I'm Michael Topham, technical writer for Digital Photo, and welcome along to this video lesson that's going to be looking at the calculations command. Last month in the October issue, we also studied the calculations command and got to know the basic controls in the calculations dialog, before finding out how it can be used to stack two channels to create a punchy black and white image with masses of contrast. If you haven't watched the part 1 video on calculations, it would be a great idea to check out the October CD first, before watching this advanced video where we're going to see how calculations can help us produce a high contrast alpha channel that can be turned into a precise selection. The two images we're going to be using in this technique are Rosanna.jpg and barndoors.jpg, which you'll find in the Start Images folder on the CD. We're going to be working with the file Rosanna.jpg first, and we're going to use the power of calculations to help us select the outline of the model and her fine hair strands. If you've ever tried to make a selection of hair before, you'll know that it's extremely difficult, and it can be a long and painstaking task when you use selection tools such as the lasso tool or pen tool. This complex job can be made a lot easier by using the calculations command, and in this video we'll show you how to create a highly detailed alpha channel, including all the intricate hair strands, before turning it into a selection ready for copying and blending with a completely new background. Right then, there's no time to lose, so let's get stuck into this month's masterclass technique and find out what has to be done to achieve the final composite portrait image. Now I'm just going to close down this final image, and I'm also just going to close down barndoors.jpg because we don't need that for the time being. So I'm going to close that down, and the file we want to start working with is Rosanna.jpg, and you'll find that in the Start Images folder, so load that up, and then you need to make sure you can see your layers palette, so I'm just going to drag in mine from the side, and you also need to make sure that you can see your channels palette. So go up to Window in the menu bar, go down, and make sure you've also got a tick alongside channels. To save a little bit of space on screen, I'm going to combine my channels palette with my layers palette by just dragging it down, and we can clearly and quickly switch between the two. Go up to Image in the menu bar and scroll down and click on Calculations to load the dialog. So the Calculations dialog is where we can stack one channel on top of another, and at the moment we can see that the source 1 and the channel is set to red, and the source 2, the channel is also set to red. Now for source 1 we want to change the channel, and we actually want to set this to blue, and we want to do the same for the source 2. So click alongside channel there, and also make sure that this is set to blue. To create the best contrast between the whites and the blacks in this image, we need to change the blending mode, and that's where we go down to blending, and we can see at the moment it's set to multiply, but we can go through and just try a few different options from the list. We can see here Color Burn has done quite a good job. The whites are becoming a little bit more white, and the blacks are quite clearly defined. But if we go down and try some other options here, just go down, try a few of the different blending modes. There we go, Hard Light has done quite a good job, but we want some of these blacks to be a little bit more black. So let's go down a couple more, down to Linear Light. Let's give that a click. That's looking a lot better. We can see there that the blacks are very crisp here along the coat and the outline. The blacks are clearly defined, and we can also see here the background is pure white. And that's what we're looking for. I'm going to go down and leave the opacity set to 100%, and moving down again, down to the result, you'll want to make sure that this is set to New Channel and not New Document or Selection. Now when you've got all these settings in your calculations dialog, you can go up and hit OK. You'll now be able to see that we've got a very high contrast black and white image here, and we can see that the blacks are very clearly defined along the edges and over on the right as well. So if you just go across now into your channels palette, you'll actually see that there's a new channel down towards the bottom, and that's the Alpha 1 channel. If you take a look above the Alpha 1 channel, you'll see there that you've got the RGB, that's the red, green and blue channels, and for the time being you want to make sure that you're only selected on the Alpha 1 channel, and that's the channel that we're going to be working with. So go across to the toolbox, and you want to pick out the brush tool now, and then head up into the options bar and check that you've got a 200 pixel brush set up. Mine is set to 300 at the moment, so I'm going to downsize that using the left square bracket key, and moving over to the mode, you want to make sure this is set to normal and that the opacity is set to 100%. Another thing that you'll want to quickly check is that your foreground color is set to black, And if you need to switch your foreground and background colours to their default settings, you can use the shortcut, which is the letter D. So with this black brush, I'm going to very carefully brush into this alpha channel, and at the moment we can see that I'm painting with a soft brush, so I'm going to go back up into the options bar here and just increase this to a hard brush using the shortcut Shift and the right square bracket key. There we are, I've got a nice hard brush now, so I can just go back into the image here and just start painting into that channel, go over the model's face, just painting over very quickly. Now this is a slightly more detailed area over here on the left, so I'm going to zoom in using the shortcut Control and Plus. I might just downsize my brush a little bit, and I'm just going to brush up carefully through this area, and then zoom out and make sure you've got everything contained. Just need to make sure that this area down here towards the bottom is showing as black as well. There we are, let's just check everything's looking pretty good. We can move the layers and channels palette out of the way for a second. Let's just drag that off the screen and just check that that's all looking pretty good. And yes, I'm pretty happy with that. So I can now drag in my layers and channels palette again and zoom out using Control and Minus. So once you're happy with the outline of the model, you can then go across into your toolbox and switch your foreground and background colours around. So now your foreground colour is set to white. And move up into the options bar and change the mode from normal to overlay. I've also decreased the opacity from 100% when we were painting with the black brush down to 25%, so just use the slider there before zooming in using Control and Plus, and then you just want to use this brush very carefully just to brush away any grey areas. So I'm just going to brush away a couple of these grey areas just around the hair strands, just moving through the image, just kind of brushing away any of these grey areas. There we go, just run the brush very quickly along the edge, something a bit like that, and just work through the image with the hand tool, looking for any kind of grey areas. There's a few areas here that I'm just going to brush away, just turn those white. And once you've done this, it'll only take you a minute or two to do. You can zoom out, and then you can just move across to the left of the image, and you can increase the opacity up to 100%, making sure the mode is still set to overlay, and then just use this brush just to run it up along the edge of the jacket there, just to make sure that jacket is nice and crisp. So go over to the other side, let's move the layers and channels up out the way, and just do the same here, just run that along the edge very carefully. Once you've done that, you can zoom back out. So now that we've refined the outline using that white overlay brush, I'm just going to drag my layers and channels palette back down, and then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to change over to the move tool, and then I'm going to move back over to my channels palette, and I'm going to hold down the Control key and then hover the cursor over the Alpha 1 channel thumbnail. If you click once whilst holding down Shift inside your Alpha 1 channel thumbnail, you'll notice that this loads up the marching ants around the outside of the model. But we actually want to select the model, so we need to go up to Select and then down to Inverse, which will inverse our selection. If you fancied using the shortcut for inverse, you could have alternatively hit Shift plus Control plus I. Moving back into the channels palette now, we're going to click on the eye visibility icon alongside the RGB channel, and then I'm actually going to select the RGB channel. There we are, and then I'm going to go up to Edit and down to Copy. We can now load up the second image that we're going to be using this technique, which is barndoors.jpg. So I'm going to go up to File, down to Open, locate the image barndoors.jpg, there it is, click on Open, and the first thing that we need to do when this image loads up is we need to make sure we can see our layers palette. Go up to Layer and go down and click on Duplicate Layer and hit OK, and then go up to Filter, go down to Blur and go across and click on Gaussian Blur. We want to set the radius to 8.0 pixels and hit OK, and then go into the Layers palette and change the blending mode of this duplicate layer to Overlay, and that will improve the contrast. Moving up to Layer in the menu bar, I'm going to go down and click on Flatten Image, and then I'm just going to blur it a little bit by going to Filter, down to Blur, and then clicking on Gaussian Blur once again. This time I'm going to blur it by 6 pixels, and I'm going to hit OK, and we've now prepared our background image. To paste our model onto this background, we can go up to Edit and down to Paste, or you could use the shortcut, which is Control plus V. Double check that you're selected on the Move tool from the toolbox, and then just move your layer 1 into position. So I'm just going to drag her down towards the bottom. I'm just going to move my layers and channels out of the way for a minute, just whilst I position her in the frame. And I'm also just going to enlarge her very slightly using the shortcut Control and T, which enters free transform, holding Shift to constrain the proportions, and I'm just going to enlarge her very slightly. And then to apply that adjustment, I'm going to hit Enter on the keyboard, and then I'm going to bring back my layers and channels. To create an improved contrast and to help the hair blend in with the background, I'm going to create a black and white adjustment layer. So let's just move the layers and channels palettes down right down to the bottom there, and then I'm going to go up to Layer, down to New Adjustment Layer, and I'm going to click on Black and White and hit OK. This will load the adjustments dialog, and you'll want to increase the reds from 40 to 120, and that will just lighten the skin tones. We've actually lightened them a little bit too much there, I think, in this image, so let's knock that back to around 90. When you're happy with the lightness of the skin tones, you can close down the adjustments dialog, and moving back to the layers palette, we can change the blending mode of this black and white adjustment layer by clicking where it says normal here, and then moving up we're going to click on soft light. Move down to layer 1 and then click on the add layer mask icon down towards the bottom of the layers palette. Moving across to the left, you want to make sure that your foreground colour is set to black and that you're also selected on the brush tool, but this time we need to use a soft brush, so hit the shortcut Shift and the left square bracket key. There we are, we've got a nice soft brush now, and change the mode from overlay to normal and decrease the opacity from 100% to 25%. You can now afford to zoom into the image using the shortcut Control and Plus, and we're just going to tidy up some of these hair strands. A 90 pixel brush is a little bit large, and you can downsize to around 50 pixels using that left square bracket key, and then I'm very carefully just going to run the brush over some of these hair strands just to improve the look, just removing some of those grey areas. And if you just spend a bit of time doing this, you can then just brush into that mask and just returning a little bit of background detail, and you're just creating a really good blend between the hair strands and the background. So take a bit of time doing this and it'll be well worth it in the long run. I'm just going to take a bit of time working through the image using the hand tool, just running the brush over some of these hair strands, and that's starting to look a lot better already. Just removing any of those grey noticeable areas that you can clearly see. This is probably going to take me a few minutes to do, so what I'll do is I'll just finish this off and then I'll rejoin you very shortly. So after about 5 minutes and working around the edge of the model's hair strands, I've removed any of those grey distinctive edges, and I can zoom out using Control and 0. It's worth knowing that if you do happen to make a mistake when brushing into your layer mask, you can change your foreground and background colours around and then paint with white into your layer mask, and that will return just a little bit of detail for you. So now that we're finished, I'm going to zoom out a little bit more, and I'm going to save this final image by going to File and down to Save As. Find the location where you'd like to save your final image and then give it the new name Portrait Composite.psd, and saving it as a Photoshop file will mean that you'll preserve all of those layers in the layers palette, providing that you've got layers ticked under the save options. I'm going to go across and click on Save. So now that you've seen how calculations can be used to stack channels on top of one another and how they're great for outputting alpha channels, which can be turned into highly detailed selections, try loading the start image Rosanna.jpg and give the technique a try yourself. I hope you've enjoyed this month's masterclass video, and be sure to apply everything that you've learnt about calculations in the last 2 issues with some of your own images, whether it be for punchy black and whites or fantastic composites. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again in another video very soon. Bye for now.